At 5:42 in the morning, under skies heavy with rain, a Russian armored convoy of 22 vehicles rolled straight into a dead-end trap they had walked into by mistake. Not bad luck, not an isolated ambush. This was the inevitable result of Russian doctrinal failure meeting Ukrainian battlefield adaptation at its most lethal. Let that sink in for a moment. 22 vehicles, BMP-2s, T-72 tanks and escort, fuel tankers, ammunition trucks, all moving in what Russian command had designated a secure logistics corridor in the Donetsk sector. They believed the low clouds, the steady downpour, and the narrow, muddy track would shield them from Ukrainian eyes. Instead, that exact combination turned the road into a perfect kill zone. The lead vehicle bogged down, the column compressed into single file. Mobility died before the first drone even appeared, and within minutes, what Russian planners had called a routine resupply run became a textbook demonstration of why their entire logistical doctrine is now collapsing under the weight of assumptions that no longer hold. This is not a story about one convoy getting caught in the rain. This is a case study in systemic Russian vulnerability, the kind of doctrinal blindness that has already cost them thousands of armored vehicles, hundreds of thousands of casualties, and any realistic path to sustained offensive momentum. Ukrainian forces didn't just ambush this convoy. They exploited a predictable Russian mistake with precision that reveals a deeper asymmetry. One side is still fighting the last war, while the other is rewriting the rules of modern combined arms warfare in real time. Pull the lens back. For decades, Russian military doctrine has treated supply convoys as protected assets. Mass them, give them some armor escort, move them under marginal weather, and assume that sheer volume plus electronic warfare will keep them safe. That assumption worked in Chechnya. It worked in Syria. It even gave them early momentum in 2022 when Ukrainian forces were still re-equipping. But the battlefield has changed. Ukrainian adaptation has turned every Russian logistical assumption into a liability, and this convoy walked right into the latest version of that trap. What happened next shocked everyone watching the footage, except those of us who have been studying this adaptation race for months. The Ukrainian response wasn't reactive. It was engineered, pre-positioned reconnaissance drones had already mapped the route. FPV strike teams were loitering at multiple altitudes. Electronic warfare specialists were monitoring Russian frequencies in real time. And when that lead BMP ground to a halt in the mud, the Ukrainians didn't hesitate. They closed the trap with clinical efficiency. Let me walk you through exactly how this unfolded step by step, because the sequence reveals everything about why Russian forces keep repeating the same fatal errors. First, the route selection itself was the original mistake. Russian command chose a narrow dirt track flanked by soft ground and tree lines, terrain that looked protected on a map but became a natural choke point the moment weather turned it into a quagmire. They ignored recent Ukrainian drone activity in the sector. They ignored the fact that their own electronic warfare vehicles had been increasingly targeted in previous weeks. And they ignored the most basic lesson of this war. Any predictable movement on predictable axes is now visible to cheap commercial drones operating in swarms. That single decision, moving a high-value convoy through contested terrain without adequate reconnaissance or alternative routes, turned a routine resupply into a sitting target. By the time the convoy reached the narrowest section of the trap was already sprung. The lead vehicle slowed, then stopped, its tracks spinning uselessly in the mud. Behind it, the rest of the column bunched up. 22 vehicles, nose to tail, no room to maneuver, no ability to disperse. Russian doctrine calls this March security. On this morning, it became collective immobility. And that is when the Ukrainian kill chain activated. The first wave came from above. FPV drones diving through the rain, each one carrying shape charges or fragmentation munitions tuned specifically for armored targets. They hit the lead and trail vehicles simultaneously. Classic Ukrainian doctrine now: deny escape forward, deny escape backward. The lead BMP erupted in a fireball, blocking the road. The rear fuel tanker took a direct hit and began burning, sending thick black smoke billowing into the low clouds. Panic spread through the column. Russian crews attempted to dismount, but the terrain and the weather worked against them. Mud sucked at boots. Rain reduced visibility, and the drones kept coming. What you are witnessing here is not random chaos. It is the systematic dismantling of Russian combined arms protection. Their electronic warfare vehicle, the one supposed to jam Ukrainian drone frequencies, was itself targeted early in the sequence. One well-placed FPV strike disabled its antenna array. Suddenly, the entire convoy was electronically naked. No jamming, no countermeasures. Just 22 vehicles exposed in a perfect linear kill zone. And it gets even more serious from here. Ukrainian operators weren't firing blindly. They had layered reconnaissance, fixed-wing drones providing overwatch, thermal imaging picking up engine heat signatures through the rain, and ground spotters confirming vehicle types and loads. Every strike was deliberate. Ammunition trucks first, the ones carrying the 152 millimeter shells that Russian artillery desperately needed further down the line. Then the fuel tankers. Then the escort armor. Within the first 90 seconds, 7 vehicles were burning. The column was paralyzed. Russian return fire was sporadic and ineffective. Machine guns firing into empty sky, a few desperate man-pads launches that achieved nothing against low, fast FPV drones operating at treetop level. This is the hidden variable Russian planners still refuse to internalize. Cheap, attritable drones have inverted the cost equation of modern warfare. A $500 FPV drone can destroy a $2 million armored vehicle and its crew, and the Ukrainians have scaled that capability into coordinated swarms. Russian doctrine still treats air defense and electronic warfare as layered shields. Ukrainian adaptation treats them as targets of first priority. The result is exactly what you saw on that muddy track at 5:42 in the morning. Total convoy annihilation in under 5 minutes. Now pull the lens back further to the doctrinal level. This wasn't the first time a Russian convoy has walked into a trap of its own making. We have seen the same pattern repeated across Kharkiv, Kherson, and now Donetsk. Russian forces continue to operate under 3 fatal assumptions. First, that mass and armor still confer protection in the age of precision loitering munitions. Second, that marginal weather provides concealment rather than creating exploitable friction. Third, that their logistical system can absorb losses without collapsing the broader front. Every one of those assumptions was disproven again this morning. The Ukrainian side, by contrast, has turned adaptation into a science. They study every Russian movement pattern. They pre-position drone teams along known logistics axes. They integrate commercial satellite imagery, local intelligence, and real-time drone feeds into a unified targeting system that operates faster than Russian command can react. This convoy didn't stumble into an ambush. It walked into a pre-planned kill zone that Ukrainian forces had been refining for weeks. Let me be crystal clear about what this actually means at the strategic level. Logistics wins wars. Always has. And right now, Ukrainian forces are systematically strangling Russian logistics while Russian command continues to feed convoys into the same predictable meat grinder. Each destroyed supply column means delayed reinforcements, reduced artillery fire, and weakened defensive lines further down the chain. Multiply this single incident by the dozens of similar strikes happening every week, and you begin to see why Russian offensive momentum has stalled, not because of Ukrainian numbers, but because of Ukrainian doctrinal superiority. The industrial and state-level consequences are already compounding. Russia's defense industry is struggling to replace lost vehicles at the rate they are being destroyed. Their fuel and ammunition stockpiles are being forced into ever more vulnerable movement patterns. Their soldiers on the front line are watching these convoys burn on social media before the official reports even reach Moscow. Morale is eroding. Command confidence is fracturing. And the political leadership in the Kremlin is left explaining to its own people why another special military operation milestone has once again turned into a humiliating reversal. This morning's convoy destruction is not an outlier. It is confirmation of the larger pattern we have been tracking since the first weeks of this war. Russian forces entered this conflict believing their Soviet-era mass mobilization model would overwhelm a smaller neighbor. Ukrainian forces responded by turning the entire battlefield into a sensor and precision network that rewards adaptation over brute force. The asymmetry is now structural. One side is learning. The other is repeating mistakes at catastrophic scale. What happens next changes everything, because Ukraine is not stopping at tactical ambushes. They are scaling this model across the entire theater. Deep strikes on rear area depots, coordinated drone campaigns against rail hubs, precision attacks on command nodes. The Russian logistical system, already strained by sanctions and production bottlenecks, is now facing a level of attrition it was never designed to withstand. And here is the broader lesson that Moscow still refuses to accept. You cannot solve a doctrinal problem with more hardware if your doctrine itself is obsolete. Russian planners keep doubling down on the same playbook: larger convoys, more armor escort, heavier electronic warfare packages, without addressing the fundamental failure of adaptability. Ukrainian forces, meanwhile, iterate daily. They refine drone tactics. They integrate new Western systems. They maintain operational tempo while Russia burns fuel and lives trying to move supplies that never arrive. Let me issue a verdict on what we witnessed this morning. This convoy did not lose a battle. Russian military doctrine lost another round in the adaptation race. The vehicles are scrap metal. The crews are casualties. And the strategic impact ripples outward: delayed offensives, overstretched defenses, and a growing realization inside the Russian high command that their assumptions about this war were catastrophically wrong from day one. History will record this phase of the conflict as the moment when precision, adaptation, and doctrinal agility proved more decisive than mass and legacy systems. The Ukrainians understand this. They are executing it with clinical precision. Russian forces are still operating on a 1980s template, hoping that sheer volume will eventually compensate for structural incompetence. The real question now is not whether another convoy will walk into a similar trap. The question is how many more will have to burn before Russian command admits that their entire logistical doctrine has become a liability rather than an asset. Because the pattern is clear, the evidence is undeniable, and the consequences are accelerating. Stay with us, because those questions do not have simple answers, and the next chapter in this adaptation race is already unfolding on the battlefield. What we saw at 5:42 this morning was not the end of a supply run. It was the latest visible fracture in a Russian war machine that is slowly but surely being dismantled by an opponent that has mastered the art of turning the enemy's own predictability against them. This is Ben Hodges. The battlefield doesn't lie, and right now, it is telling us exactly who is adapting faster and who is paying the price for refusing to change.